January 10th, 2026. This is the evening of Saturday Night Live. No, Saturday Night Infinite Plane Saturn Day. So it's Infinite Plane Saturn Day Night Live. And generally we do open phones for Saturn Day, but the audio isn't that great when I'm using the Google Voice on my laptop. So I don't know if we want to start doing live calls yet, but we do have an active chat. And right now we're looking over the recent event, which has a lot of interesting connections to the Floyd thing in a lot of ways. And someone had noted how the T-Rex and the great white shark on the scene are kind of hinting at maybe Spielberg. Spielberg part of this thing. We've got his Age of Disclosure coming up, which has me thinking, well, in terms of metascriptors, it's probably not unreasonable to put him on the list of possible directors of this particular event. I haven't done a lot of research around other content creators to see what their takes on it, but I did see Jake the Awake say, I think he insinuated it might be completely AI, which wouldn't be shocking if you think about it. Because we've been looking at this, like, I have a couple of questions about it. Generally, I would say fake until proven real, just because we're dealing with liars. And there's so many other suggestions of hoaxery, hoax indicators. And I have a legitimate question about the dog. There was a dog in the back seat. How did it handle the wreck? There's the fact that the guy who shot Renee Good had previously been hit by a car driven by a protester, and he got 33 stitches, according to J.D. Vance. So the 33 stitches, I heard that. I'm like, okay. Code. That's code. It's not definitive, but it really stands out at a time like this. So that's kind of my framework here is, let's analyze all the hoax indicators before we make a determination as to whether we know for sure it's real or fake. Meanwhile, the people who automatically believe what they see on the screen have turned into the Walking Dead, just zombie mobs, completely emotional. And this is psychological warfare. And they really start with the emotions. If they can tap you emotionally, it overrides the intellect. And that's all we're seeing right now. A bunch of emotional people reacting to this in a way that was obviously intended. And the day before, we were talking about Ashley Babbitt, because there's a hoax anniversary. And then this happened. And we were contrasting the two. And I've seen some mainstream media making these same comparisons. And one of our hoax indicators is, does it connect to previous fake events? Because all the fake events exist within a fictional universe. And if there's a lot of, intra hoax references, especially recurring, I guess, actors, sheriffs, politicians, Mayor Frey, is that his name? The mayor who cried for George Floyd's in on this one. And then someone brought this up too. So we broke this down the other day about how Wicked is entirely Antifa coded. I've only seen the first part, and I might go watch part 2. But it's Antifa coded, and the green skin correlates quite a lot with a lot of the symbolism tied into this class warfare narrative as we see it played out in movies and on the world stage. The Luigi thing and the Joker hair, the green Joker hair, Luigi, the Joker correlations, it's all consistent. Well, Wicked ends with the blackout in the Emerald City. Now, Seattle is also called the Emerald City, and much of the predictive programming that we have observed for a long time has pointed at Seattle. So now, given that, part 2 is called For Good. And yeah, Busy 56, End ICE for Good. There's a 1,000 or so protests being set up right now. But I've seen that as well. End ICE for Good, a reference to the martyr, Renee Good. And part 2 of Wicked is called For Good. So there's something up with that, and I haven't seen it, but I'm certain it's relevant to what we're discussing here. Oh, that's right, Busy 56. There was a dog in the car, and he says on South Park, Christy Nome, who looks like a Gelfling, by the way, if you've seen The Dark Crystal. Christy Nome is with ICE, and she keeps shooting and killing dogs. Yeah, in her biography, she talks about how she had to kill the dog named Cricket, and she had to kill a goat. And it was a way of, like, I guess, building up the idea that she's willing to get her hands dirty. So they thought it was good optics for this Barbie to go kill a dog. But in South Park, she was shooting and killing dogs. Yeah, there was a dog in the back seat, and I haven't really seen much about it. But it was in the back seat right before the event, and I didn't see anything about. I mean, I heard someone talking about watching the dog, but I never saw it get out of the vehicle. And so I'm thinking, I mean, I'm not rushing to this was all AI, but I'm open to it having been staged, and maybe there could have been multiple takes, or maybe the video we got was spliced or something. I don't take for granted that what we're seeing is 100% authentic. We really shouldn't be approaching things like that. Not in 2026. What's up, Scotty Smith? He says, Brother of Light, it's good to hear from you. Yes, thanks for joining. Saturday night is usually for open phones. Infinite Plane Saturday, we just kind of go back and review the last week of PsyOps. And I keep up with a lot of the predictive programming. I keep up with a lot of the concurrent stuff, which is even more relevant. In fact, there was some story about some grave robber. Yeah, there you go. Rust of October says, I'm curious how 28 years later the Bone Temple is going to play out. Okay, so this is intriguing because 28 days later is written by the guy who brought us Civil War. In Civil War, they killed Trump, by the way. But it's about the rage of the right against media. And this all ties into the virus in 28 days later, a virus that's created by rage in apes who are forced to watch violent TV. And they don't know these things are hoaxes. So it radicalizes them and it gestates, it becomes a virus and it spreads and everybody gets violent, which is a recurring theme. I mentioned this is the theme in Naked Gun, where the Elon Musk character named Kane creates a mind virus thing called Plot that will turn everyone violent. Meanwhile, the elite go hide in their bunkers. But 28 days later has the same theme. And I've dubbed this hypothetical mind virus scenario Disease X. And now we're seeing how it's being applied specifically to the right, and has been for some time. This Disease X, meaning right-wing memes on X, turning people violent. But in general, we're talking about, the violence that erupts as a result of something that you see on a screen, like the atrocity propaganda from 2020 with George Floyd. You could look at that as something of a mind virus. And same thing with this. And these have been compared. So it's interesting that 28 years later comes out and it's called The Bone Temple. And I posted this on my Twitter. If you go to IPS Think Tank, because in the news, as we speak, there's this big story about a grave robber who apparently has some kind of a bone temple in his house. I'm like, isn't that curious? You got Bone Temple 28 years later, just as the mind virus and the violence starts breaking out on the streets. I mean, there's protests all over now and it's heating up. And now we've got, I think there's even a upcoming Game of Thrones that we need to keep an eye out for. But now there's this, grave robber with his, I don't know how many skeletons he has at his house. I mean, this is like Ed Gein's scale, maybe even bigger. But yeah, Bone Temple coming out at the same time. Very curious. Again, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see all these posts. I tend to retweet anything of interest, and if you're following me there, I'll retweet you. I think it's useful. I used to use minds.com, but I'm just using X now as a way to take notes on what's going on. So this would be an instance of what we would call concurrent programming. And there's more than one. There's some other predictive programming or concurrent programming having to do with Greenland also. But it was Ven the Plaguewind in our Discord server who pointed this out. So again, 28 years later, the Bone Temple. And then you have, and he highlighted this in the article about the grave robber, horror movie comes to life. That's in the headline. Cops find more than 100 skeletal remains in the man's home. So this is in Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, this was on January 9th, horror movie comes to life, 100 skeletons. And then January 14th in cinemas, 28 days later, The Bone Temple. Now that hasn't even come out yet, but you could look at this news story as predictive programming. But I think the term concurrent is more relevant here anyway, because it's timed to happen at the same time. Donnie of the Dead says, I'm curious how this fourth 28 days later will go, as the first two were pre-programmed for the COVID era, Annihilator 2 and the writer did Civil War. Yeah, good point. Because I think, and I've said this for some time, that I think the next pandemic, the disease X that the WHO created as a hypothetical, that this next pandemic is going to be a mind virus pandemic, locking down the internet, having to curtail the flow of information because mind viruses are triggering violent responses. And if you've seen the Civil War, again, the director of Civil War wrote 20 days later, it has the right wingers as these anti-media types. And they're very violent. Just asking people, like, what kind of American are you? And they're just sort of arbitrarily killing people because of their political affiliations. And the movie also shows the disconnect between the people who aren't paying attention to the news and the news media on the front lines, suggesting that a lot of people in the movie were kind of not even aware it was going on. They weren't really plugged in. Meanwhile, the media is portrayed as martyrs who are suffering and going through all the turmoil to get the stories. And there's this big disconnect. And there is a disconnect, but it's not like they're suffering or they're martyred for their cause. That closed movie set, that distance they have, is how they fake stuff. But anyway, Greenland 2 Migration, released on January 9th. Empty Bliss said, some nice concurrent programming with all the talk of Greenland acquisition. It's a sequel from 2020. And the tagline for this movie says, 5 years ago, the world ended. That was just the beginning. Now, that kind of reminds me of Rob Reiner's Spinal Tap 2, The End Continues. Is that what it's called? Yeah, 5 years later, the world ended. That was just the beginning, in theaters January 9th. Greenland 2. And it has the Earth getting hit by something. It's usually the thing. How many times have you seen the Earth destroyed by some... I think this one is a comet. Breaking, the streets of Los Angeles have been taken over by thousands of protesters. And there was already some protests building up. Now, this set of riots is going to be a lot more interesting than the last one, just because of generative AI. I'm finding some great content. I have one here. You've probably seen it. I'm tweeting these things like crazy. One of the protesters is being dragged out by ICE and then somebody turned it into a dance. I mean, it's unbelievable. But we're at this point now where you really can't differentiate between real and fake. So the idea that this whole thing could be, enhanced or completely augmented, is just prompted. It's not really outside the realm of possibility. Or if you think it is now, it certainly won't be in a few years, if not months. And it was last year that Mountain Head came out. And if you haven't seen Mountain Head, it's obviously about Elon Musk, who owns the social media platform, and generative AI is causing the world to go crazy because people are manufacturing videos and setting off fights between groups, provocations, and it's all fake, but nobody knows. Now, that movie came out right before the LA riots of last year, which were, again, started by ICE. And then after that, you had No Kings with like 1,000 cities. So they've been organizing for the last year. Let's see. Rest of October says Night of the Living Dead series franchise takes place in Pennsylvania. I did not know that. Is that George Romero? And we were talking about Richard Matheson and I Am Legend, Last Man on Earth, Omega Man, the beginning of this thing. But I Am Legend is really the first zombie pandemic book. And in that one, the zombies are more like vampire zombies, but it does start off with a vampire bat virus. So the bat has been a consistent symbol here. King Ravana says that guy lives close to us, and it's common for sales of skulls to go for 3,000. That's a lot of tattoo money, right? I've heard of this. I've heard of people selling bones on the black market. I didn't know if that was still a thing, but I saw the guy. He must have been busy, but I'm curious as to how he did it. It seems kind of fake to me because, and this occurred to me the other day, if you're going to try to dig up a grave to rob it, you would hit the burial vault. Back when I first got into YouTube conspiracy land, a lot of people believed in these things called FEMA coffins, started by, Alex Jones kind of started that, where people would post videos of these trucks hauling these inverted tubs, big stacks of them. And these were referred to by truthers who are never right about anything as coffins. But they're so big that you could fit like 10 people in each one. And they said, yeah, they're going to throw us in these things and bury us. I'm like, you know what? If they're going to wipe us out, they're not going to give you a funeral. They're not going to put you in a grave. It's ridiculous. But I knew what those things were because I was working in the death care profession. And at the cemeteries, they have these things because you put them over the coffins to essentially prevent the cemetery from collapsing. The reason why you don't fall into graves is that the coffins are not imploding. The reason why you can exhume a coffin years later and do another autopsy is because the burial vault protects it. And it's just a plastic tub. So if you were trying to rob a grave, you wouldn't be able to without somehow cutting through the burial vault. So I'm not really sure how they're pulling this off. And I'm thinking the story might be fake. And we're talking about the grave robber in Pennsylvania and his homemade bone temple. 100 skulls and mummified body parts found. Horrific grave robbing. Selling stolen human remains. So I'm going through the comments here in the various articles. I don't know how he did it. Jonathan Gerlach, 34, of Ephrata, Pennsylvania, from Mount Moriah Cemetery. Mount Moriah. Where have you heard that before? That name sounds familiar. In what police here in Delaware County have described as a horror movie come to life. So again, horror movie come to life. and this is a week before. See, I would almost posit that this could be a PR stunt for 28 years later. And they just use their props and some AI generated grave robber who probably doesn't even exist. I'm not sure if this guy even exists. I just find it kind of unbelievable that he could have 100 skulls. Anybody else find this unbelievable? The timing of it is suspect. All right, so we'll continue going through my feed here. So yes, I think that Wicked Part 2 for Good may have some significance. Continuing, breaking, thousands of leftists have taken over major roads in Minneapolis, vandalizing businesses and homes along the way. Oh yeah, I see that. For Renee Good is spray painted all over the place. You know, I'm actually kind of surprised at this. I didn't think that the mobs would ever get out in the winter. I always figured they had to wait till it warmed up, but no, they're out in force. So this is the summer, no, this is the winter of love. We started off summer of love. This is winter of love. Massive amounts of leftists stormed the streets in Minneapolis to force police into surrendering. They've camped out where the anti-ICE terror attack happened. Protesters beside Renee Good's memorial perform a ritual over it. F-ICE riders have broken into and started looting hotels. They're hitting up the hotels where they believe that the ICE agents are sleeping. So here's a headline from Newsweek. America watches one shooting and comes to two different conclusions. Now, I bring this up because we have an axiom for this precise type of thing. We call it, well, number 47, which is whenever there's a bifurcated response perfectly along party lines, it's probably a hoax. So your political leanings determine whether or not you think it was deserved. And did you catch the latest video where the shooter says effing B afterward? That's code. That's going to be looked at as misogynistic. It's going to be looked at as as definitely outside of protocol. That's someone who's acting out of rage and anger. This is a very well scripted, staged event. Again, two different conclusions. The killing of Renee Good by an ICE agent in Minneapolis has drawn comparisons with the death of Ashley Babbitt 5 years earlier at the J6 Capitol riot, sparking debate about the similarities. So we're looking at the comparison between this and George Floyd, this and Ashley Babbitt. Renee Nicole Good's killing sparks Ashley Babbitt comparisons. Again, Ashley Babbitt's not dead, but this is just two different martyrs. And here's a reference to Greenland. President Trump indicates America will take Greenland. It will be the easy way or the hard way. Quote, we're going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not. If we don't do it the easy way, we'll do it the hard way. If we won't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor. So again, that comes up as the movie Greenland just comes out. Congressman Randy Fine says to the American people, stand in a way, you'll meet the same fate. I've seen sentiment similar to this from ICE agents as well. Haven't you learned? And then we'll get into this other thing as well. So a couple things. One, I haven't been keeping up with a lot of Candace Owens, but I did check out her latest episode this morning. And she's talking about how a few days before Charlie Kirk was shot, he was in South Korea. And I talked about this, how he went and he interacted with the Youth Republicans, this Christian Republican conservative group who prayed for him. And how on September 10th, The Tempest comes out, and the main character, who has Trump's birthday, by the way, the actor's got Trump's birthday, 6/14. He is the leader of the Youth Republicans, very much a Charlie Kirk-like character, and he gets shot in the neck in front of his audience in a church, and his widow takes over his organization, and she's basically like Erica Kirk. So we talked about the similarities between The Tempest, which is on Hulu, and Charlie Kirk and Erica Kirk. Well, Candace Owens brought up this theory now that maybe he was killed because he didn't go along with the plan, that he was supposed to go to South Korea and somehow connect TPUSA with the Moonies, Reverend Sung Young Moon, and turn TPUSA into a global multi-billion-dollar operation, and he didn't want to play ball. And I bring this up because Charlie Kirk quite literally walked in the footsteps of his corresponding movie character, and then he comes back and he gets killed, and now she's suggesting that that trip may have something to do with his death. Again, it's Candace Owens, it's convoluted. I'm sure she's getting a lot of traffic for it, but she did bring us some interesting things about Erica Kirk and the human trafficking stuff, which I barely looked into, but now I'm looking into it a little closer, since we can see she's 1 degree separated from the Temple of Set. And if, by the way, if you're a 5th degree Setian, you're called a Maga. So the Temple of Set is a Church of Satan offshoot. Apparently the Satanists weren't satanic enough for Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino because they were not theistic. They saw Satan as a symbol, as a metaphor, as an archetype, but not as a literal entity. So he forms the Temple of Set, which believes in a literal devil, which they worship. Well, the founder of the Temple of Set was ordered to create a book called From PSYOP to Mind War by one of the chairpersons, a general who works for TPUSA. So that manual about mind war, which many of us have been looking at for some time, was directed, not necessarily written by, but it was written at the behest of someone at TPUSA. Not insignificant, especially when you look at Michael Aquino's association with the whole satanic panic thing and the accusations leveled against him with regard to children being trafficked. I mean, this is like way before QAnon, the satanic panic stuff, but it's the same basic stories. And so now here you have Erica Kirk associated with some organization that helps orphans on military bases, and somebody associated with that was trafficking children. I mean, it's really dark stuff, if true. Tominoid says, 28 years later, the Bone Temple is scheduled to be released by Sony Pictures in the United Kingdom on 14 January and 16 January in the United States. I will see that. Rust of October says, seems very hard to be grave robbing in the 2020s. Yeah, what about security? But still, I'm running into the problem of getting into a grave and then hitting the burial vault. You would have to dig all around that in order to get access to the casket, the coffin. And then you'd have to go into that. So I'm just suggesting here that that guy is probably fake. And the story is probably fake. Rust of October says the officer that shot Babbitt was recently outed as a millionaire now. I know that story was definitely, that whole event with Ashley Babbitt was definitely designed to instigate, to create this perception, that she's a martyr and that this guy was a murderer, that it was unjustified. And she was shot in the neck. Now, the autopsy said it hit her clavicle, went through part of her shoulder, but the fact of it is, you see her dying with a bloody neck. Now, consider the fact that she's wrapped in an American flag, trying to take back America, and gets shot in the neck. Charlie Kirk, America Comeback Tour, Turning Point, USA, Make America Great Again. The idea of trying to take the country back from the progressives, being met with the bullet to the neck in both these instances, seems very symbolic. She was Kirked before Charlie Kirk was. 91 Okie says a video on BitChute breaks down the Ashley Babbitt act. Yeah, Ashley Babbitt with the backpack full of padding. The whole thing was an act. You're probably talking about Woo's News. But yes, you're right about that. The Ashley Babbitt act. Her mom's in on the act. Trump's in on the act. It's a manufactured martyr, just like this one, just like George Floyd. All right, let's continue down my feed here. New video shows Erica Kirk back before she was Kirk, but she's doing some DOD Homeland Security video having to do with, it's called Black Start USA from 2010. And this Black Start USA is about EMP attacks that wipe out the grid. So EMPs have been a recurring thing, blackouts, but Black Start USA. This made me think about the book by her nemesis, Candace Owens, who has a book called Blackout. But this really kind of contradicts Erica Kirk's statements about not being into politics. No, she's been in politics for a long time, obviously. Plus, there's a lot of fishy stuff between her and her exes, specifically the guy with the Pizzagate tattoo, who was friends with Charlie Kirk. I mean, it's all arranged. I don't think anybody believes that they had any children. Also, you have the Boeing 747 E-4B Night Watch, which is referred to as the Doomsday plane. It was spotted at LAX. That's the plane that Trump will get on if everything goes blackout, if everything gets nuked, if we go into Mad Max, that's his plane. And we've been discussing all these various movies that show like Paradise, and then as alluded to in Naked Gun, and then in Fallout, where the elite go into bunkers and we're left to deal with the radiation, with the post-apocalyptica. So there's now a Chaz, an autonomous zone in Minneapolis. We've seen this before. If you remember the Capitol Hill autonomous zone out there in Seattle, it was a no-go for anybody. And I think it descended into practically cannibalism. It was pretty awful. It was an experiment in collectivism. It was an experiment to see if they could actually pull it off, communism. And it didn't work well. They had a garden, but the garden was meant for, I think they said, Blacks, Indigenous, people of color first. So it was like a no whites farm. And then they said, take down the fences because that's speciesist. And if a cow wants to walk across that land, they ought to be allowed to. But their crops are destroyed by some Antifa guy doing martial arts moves with a stick. It was a failed experiment. So, Marcel, thank you for joining. We started a few minutes late. I had done a time lapse of Renee Good, a sketch. I actually put it on eBay. I was just going to test the waters here. People get very sentimental about their martyrs, and so I decided to do some artwork like the right was trying to, and they didn't fulfill this, but do you remember before Charlie Kirk was shot, Elon Musk said he was going to put $1 million into artists to paint murals of the girl that was killed on the subway? Now, I purposefully did not memorize her name. I probably could remember it if I had to, but everyone was saying, never forget, never forget. I'm like, no, I don't need that particular mind virus. But Musk was paying $1 million for artists across the country to do murals of her everywhere because they were going to try to turn this into their own George Floyd, their own White Lives Matter moment. But then the next day, Charlie gets it, and nobody cared about her anymore, and no one's looked into it since. Okay, let's have here. Here we go. So here's a little more information about this. From PSYOP to Mindware, the Psychology of Victory by Colonel Paul Vallely. That's the guy who's at Turning Point USA. I retweeted a video about it that just shows you that, yes, this guy who's directly connected to Charlie Kirk, now Erica Kirk, was working with Michael A. Aquino, PSYOP Research and Analysis Team Leader. A lot of TikTokers are making threats. I mean, really, a lot of this stuff's repeat from a few years ago. And then the post office released this a few days ago, a letter. And their letter basically says Postal Service employees continue to provide essential services. And it's essentially saying that if they can't deliver because of societal chaos, you can just take your letters directly to the local office. It's a memo, a USPS memo, and it's a service letter like the one issued in March of 2020 during COVID. And it doesn't specify any crisis in particular, but it does list whatever could happen. So the timing of it's kind of conspicuous. Ryan Routh, this just came out. Ryan Routh was known to U.S. officials before the attempt. You know, Ryan Routh was on some BBC documentary. And then Thomas Matthews Crooks was in that Black Rock video. Again, JD Vance mentioned that the guy who shot her was probably traumatized from his 33 stitches. The agent suffered serious lacerations on both arms that required 33 stitches to close. JD Vance engaged in a lengthy defense of the officer. He was dragged. So he says, he had his life nearly ended, dragged by a car, 33 stitches. So you think maybe he's a bit sensitive about somebody ramming him with an automobile. Heavy clashes. There's protests everywhere right now. We're still kind of watching this thing just kicking off. And someone had mentioned that across the street from the shooting, there was a gigantic T-Rex smashing a car in somebody's driveway. And then next door, there was a great white shark. Thank you, Marcel. He brought in a bucket full of wrenches, lasers, 33 NDB, Busy 56, Hello Ether, and PSYOP Sidecar. And T-Rex in Space have received gift memberships. T-Rex in Space is not science fiction. It actually happened. When the planet killer asteroid hit the Earth 66 million years ago, it hit with such force and velocity, punctured a hole in the atmosphere. It blasted a bunch of Earth into space, a bunch of biomatter, water, dinosaurs, all of it. And some scientists have suggested that there are dinosaur bones on the moon, probably a dinosaur belt. Like I'm waiting for a T-Rex skull to smash through the ISS. Lean Dion says Tyrannosaurus Rex means Tyrant Lizard King. Well, okay, Jurassic Park, directed by Steven Spielberg. Jaws, directed by Steven Spielberg. So that's why I'm suggesting there's something about those. I mean, when you look at a movie for the purpose of analyzing it, you don't assume anything in the scene to be random, accidental. You have to assume some intentionality. All right, moving on. I'm going through my Twitter feed again at iPS Think Tank. Tucker Carlson says the U.S. is gearing up for a big war. The Pentagon budget has been boosted to 1.5 trillion. He says that's a war budget, a big war budget. Again, Tucker Carlson, he's a survivor of a demonic attack that made him bleed and left bloodstains on his bed and left him with 14-inch scars, although he won't show us. But yes, that guy, alien demon attack survivor, says it's fair to expect the signs suggest that we're going to have a big war soon. So a little more information about the documentary Black Start. The filmmaker, Petrea Patrick's YouTube, has clips from the documentary that include Fox News contributor Janine Pirro, former AZ Congressman Trent Franks, and former CIA Director James Woosley. And it's about EMP attacks, grid vulnerability. We'll have to do a breakdown of all the blackout programming we've received since White Noise, Leave the World Behind. Leave the World Behind, significantly produced by the Obamas. And there was this one called American Blackout from 2013, 10 years before Leave the World Behind, where Obama has a cameo directing people to listen to the media. Justin, Seattle protesters chant death to ICE. Yeah, I've seen this. But we're definitely looking at a bifurcated psyop situation where lefties think she's a victim, right wingers think she deserved it. There's no middle ground here. Busy says there was a news story about a Minnesota woman killed by a shark while vacationing in the Virgin Islands yesterday. Marcel says first protest in Canada yesterday. Bach attended and made a video. Oh, Bach Precision, good. I could go down the street and check out the local protests. It's the same people. It's not that big of a protest, but they're very spirited. Seems like every couple of months they go out there and they emote. Plain Dakota says ice is. Right. Well, there's certainly symbolism inherent in all of this, and I'm thinking Winter of Love is kind of the overarching theme here. But we're also looking at like ice, for example. There was a Godzilla versus King Kong, and it was the there's a few different, like there's New Empire, like New EMP Empire. Then you had Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire, and I thought, well, Frozen Empire could be referencing nuclear winter, for example. And the nuke stuff has been hyped up. Putin just launched one at Ukraine. It wasn't armed. It was basically a dummy, but it was just to show that his, I think it's called the Oreshnik missile. Putin's nuke-capable missile blitzes Ukraine. This was 2 days ago. Russia strikes Ukraine with nuclear-capable missile. It wasn't Satan, or Satan 2, Again, this is very consistent with what we would expect with Fallout. And again, Fallout and Oppenheimer, both by the Nolans, both of them have that 33 code built into it. All right, and continuing to roll down my Twitter feed. Leftist man calls on Minneapolis residents to take up arms against law enforcement. Looks like an actor to me. I don't know how many of these protesters are paid, but I'm kind of looking for some side work. Maybe I should go show up that protest corner over here. All right, let's move on. If you haven't gone into the Discord server, it's ips.monster. Our research is relentless, nonstop. Lloyd says, you would think Tim would provide links with his notification. Yeah, go to ips.monster, or there is a link at the very top. Edward Snowden files expose child trafficker Erica Kirk as Charlie's handler. These are engineered narratives where he's an innocent guy and she swooped in to take over the organization. Cool story, but they're equally complicit. They're both part of it. They both got the same script before they ever got, quote, married. Completely fake. I saw this article that came out a couple days ago, Daily Star. AI imagines what Elvis would look like at 91. Elvis's birthday is on the 8th. Where are the people waiting for JFK to come back? And there was this conspiracy theory for some time that said that Donald Trump was Elvis. I don't think Trump's 91. So many of these conspiracy theories that have floated around have just kind of just self-debunked. So here's a comment from Vincito Manaya says, it was a nod to Spielberg at the ice sham scene. A video from some ice gawker panned to a front lawn, which bizarrely or not had a large model of T-Rex on a crush car. Nothing's accidental. Yeah, between that and the shark, I'm saying that's definitely Spielberg. And Spielberg's going to be big this summer with the age of disclosure. All right, moving on. Here's a headline from September 11th. The Fableman. Steven Spielberg movie we've been waiting 4 decades for him to make. So Steven Spielberg, again, metascriptor, big with the alien stuff. And the alien stuff is something we've talked about. It coincides with the hive mind theory, or rather theme. And I finished Pluribus, and Pluribus ends. Season 1 ends. The last 2 words, atom bomb. And 33 years ago, we had the last nuclear weapons tests here in America, and Trump's resuming those. Again, the 33 code is big in a lot of these shows when it comes to that specific topic. Fallout and Oppenheimer are included in that. Philadelphia protesters want, quote, ICE out for good. And it's capital G. Okay, yes, I have to watch this next Wicked because it's called For Good. And again, with the Antifa code, it's got to have something. Has anyone seen it? If anyone has seen, it says, you will be changed, wicked for good. And then you have, of course, the Wicked Witch of the West in green, who EMPs Seattle. I'm not sure what it is. I know there's a deeper subtext between these two, and how strange they're acting off camera, like, I mean, off the screen, but on camera. More than 1,000 ICE out protests planned across the U.S. It's from Metro today. Jurassic World Rebirth brings back iconic scene. Lord Laney posted, I just read this by the Daily Mail, quote, hazardous radiation fog alerts have been issued in 3 states today. It says the last time this happened was on January 6th. So a big fog storm blowing in. And that's what I'm thinking here, is that if there is a lockout, it'll be due to fallout, because you may not see the nuke except on TV, but the winds will bring the fallout to where you are, and you'll have to stay home and get your Taco Bell drone delivered. All right, let me go back to your comments. Plain Dakota says, I started watching Fallout. It starts out in Vault 33. I got to the 3rd episode of Tempest. It's hard to watch the show. They're not terrible. Tempest is boring, but if you follow it, and I've done a lot of breakdowns on that particular one. You can go to my timosmond.substack. You'll see that Erica Kirk has tracked with that show. I call it the Erica Kirk conundrum, because even last year, there were still experienced media fakery analysts who were saying the stuff you see in movies is only coincidental. It's not intentionally matching up with the psyops. For some reason, a lot of them wanted to defend that point. And I said, well, then explain Erica Kirk, because you have a show that mirrors the assassination real time. And it's not some fringe production. This is the #1 show in Japan, Taiwan, in South Korea. It's like this huge show trending on Hulu on that day, September 10th. And it has the exact scene. But then the follow-up episodes are the widow taking over the organization, the widow having to show vulnerability and having to cry on camera in order to win over her now deceased husband's constituency. And then she's accused of faking her grief and possibly of being behind the plot to kill her own husband. So everything we've seen with Erica Kirk since September had already occurred in the show The Tempest back in September. So if you're still of this opinion, this perspective that what we're pointing out between entertainment and the fake events are just coincidences, then explain how Erica Kirk is still walking along the same path, matching her corresponding character in this show after the show's already been released. Like, we're watching real time the fulfillment of predictive programming. I mean, there was concurrent programming in the shooting, but then the follow-up stuff was all real-time alignment, concurrent with her actions. So that's a lot of coincidences. I mean, that explanation has been debunked as lazy thinking, or maybe even just premature opinion derived from a lack of information. But we have the information now. Fallout definitely has the 33 code, and you can look at my blog as well. It has foreshadowing for the Trump assassination attempt. So there's this scene where some character finds out that there was a stolen election between control of Vault 32 and 33. And the character, her name is, I think it's Betty Pearson, is the one who would represent Kamala Harris, I believe. But anyway, she's behind this orchestration, and there's a big massacre. And they clean up the evidence of the massacre with the exception of one drop of blood, which happens to be on the right side of the face of a foosball character who looks just like Donald Trump. And I saw that. I screen capped it because it's only one frame. I made a blog post about it. And I said, look, in Fallout, you have this subtext where you see Trump with blood on the right side of his head. That was in April 2024. Again, 3 months later, Trump gets it. And that's just one more example. Of course, we had people at the time saying it's just a coincidence. Well, we're acknowledging these coincidences. Yeah, the coincidences, yes. But we're saying these are intentional coincidences. They are intentionally coinciding the entertainment with the forthcoming fake events. It's formulaic. I'm watching season 2 of Fallout. I just seen the first episode. Then I got distracted by Pluribus. Roast of October says the paid protesters has got to be a great gig. Yeah, I think so too. Lean Dion says Trump is wearing a bobblehead lapel of himself recently. Interesting. Busy says Wicked for Good has death fakery in it. Well, I have to watch the whole thing because I go to these movies for a reason. I could watch it here, I could rent it and watch it on my screen, but I'll be distracted. When I go to the theater, I tend to absorb more of it. I take notes, but also the trailers usually have relevance, not just the movies, but the trailers. And I've pointed this out multiple times. The predictive programming setup will be revealed in the very important, the key scenes or themes will be revealed in these trailers. Now, I pointed out before that in all the examples of Trump in movies foreshadowing his future role as president, in all of those, there's either the element of the Twin Tower disaster or an assassination attempt on him that he survives, or both. It's like his reoccurring theme. But I pointed out here, like even with Megalopolis, Homelander, in The Boys, Civil War, that's the Captain America, and then Mickey 17, in all these various examples, the Trump character survives. But there is an exception, and that would be Civil War. And in Civil War, it's 100% based on Trump, and they specifically request a black female to shoot him. I mean, it's hardly even subtle. It's actually very unsubtle. And I think that it's noteworthy here because of the director, and it ties into 28 days later, 28 years later. All right, continuing here. A new crowd has descended in downtown Los Angeles. Black clothing, helmets, and backpacks dressed all in black. At the scene in Minneapolis, I noticed a green umbrella. And umbrellas were a huge part of 2020. If you recall the rioters, the very first person who kicked off the demolition of the AutoZone had a black umbrella. Groups throwing gang signs, singing F Donald Trump. Again, a lot of this is just recent in the last couple of hours. Video shows liberals training to fight against federal agents and ICE in North Carolina in a church. Breaking, leftist rioters have attempted to invade the federal facility in Los Angeles, charging into a federal building. Massive turnout at Calgary Independence event. Protesters in Santa Ana throwing safety cones at DHS officers. Yeah, it's definitely escalating. Pandemonium. I think they shut down schools in Minneapolis. All right, moving on. Does anyone here think it's real? That's what I would like to know. Because I'm not trying to be, um, you know, too certain about something without reasons. Like, I'm not just saying it's fake. But what I am saying here is that as a rule, as a methodology here, we have to be skeptical and we have to look at this event in the context of previous events, of previous similar events, and the media's general tendency to simulate events in order to provoke. And is this within the realm of fakeability? And nothing about this is organic. I don't think anybody would say it's completely random. But I don't have any reason to assume that this Renee Good is actually dead. The scene itself is very impressive and realistic, but it's not outside of what any special Steven Spielberg could pull something like this off. Renee Good's dog, who was hanging out of the back right window, named Hazelnut, was in the car, according to Grok, but not harmed. Footage shows it was watching but unhurt. It was taken in by family. So there's the answer. The dog's name is Hazelnut, and it wasn't harmed. I saw it there, and I was thinking, that's strange. What happened to it? I never saw it get out of the vehicle. Okay, what we have here, Jonathan Gerlach. 533 accounts and pages of Gerlach revealed an abundance of accounts referencing skeleton collections, corpses, taxidermy human skulls, store oddities, and bone museums. So is he a sicko, or is it some kind of a demented art project? Not quite as bad as Ed Gein, I don't think. Okay, I'm scrolling through my Discord server. All right, she was a poet. National Youth Poet Amanda Gorman releases a stirring poem following the tragic ICE killing of Minneapolis mother Renee Good. I wasn't sure how compelling of a martyr she actually was, but apparently it struck a chord with the left. Russia sends nuclear threat to the U.S. Do not play games. Russia has issued a direct nuclear threat to the UK and US following a seizure of a Marin era oil tanker in the North Atlantic, which has him raging. So the last episode that I watched of Tempest, I think it was episode 4, ends with a nuclear sub. And then, of course, Pluribus ends with atom bomb. Then, of course, you have multiple movies where this is like Fallout's a big one. And these movies aren't there for your entertainment. The movies are there to plant suggestions, to educate you. Like we had to be educated as to the pandemic, as to how to respond to it, how to react. The movie's conditioning you for these things. And we've been getting a mass education in, well, blackouts, EMPs, and fallout scenarios through entertainment. Busy says the ICE defense training and church story similar to the movie One Battle After Another, where the main girl hides in a church and the nuns are training with machine guns to fight ICE. Oh, interesting. Lean Dion says the footage alone was compelling, but everything surrounding the good event screams hoax op. Right, exactly. And we may not know how it was performed, But just because you don't know how the trick was performed doesn't mean you have to treat it as real. For example, the magic show analogy. If you go to a magic show, you may not know how every trick is performed. Do you just say, well, that was magic? No, you just say, that's a trick. I just don't know how it was done. So in this case, or like Charlie Kirk, for example, people are like, well, how did they do it? Squibs, prosthetic neck, tube, blood, easy. It's been done for decades. So in this case, how would you do a scene where a person in a vehicle gets shot and then the vehicle crashes? Well, this is typical special effects stuff. Squibs aren't just blood packets. Squibs can also involve, like in the making of the Matrix, little explosive charges that can do what bullets do in appearance. So that the windshield could have been rigged with squibs. And then crashing into that other car, that's the part I'm trying to figure out. Well, how was that performed? And then the airbags. Did the airbags legitimately deploy? The blood on it looked a little theatrical. So yeah, there's some questions as to how the trick was performed, but all the indicators lean towards it being a trick. And if your sole evidence is it looked real, that's not evidence. They may have just pulled off an effective illusion. And that's kind of where our starting point has to be if we're going to be reasonable about things here. If we're just going to believe whatever we see because it looks believable, well, good luck maintaining your sanity as generative AI gets better and better. The fact that it's 0.6 miles away from where George Floyd died alone is, to me, it's the same movie set. And then the media's own take on it, comparing it to George Floyd, comparing it to Ashley Babbitt, the convenient narratives that completely split the public two ways on it. This is just too perfect. Yeah, I saw that one. Allegedly, one of Good's ex-husbands died on George Floyd Day. It was May 25th, 2023. I saw that. Another George Floyd connection. Sort of like the fact that Charlie Kirk and George Floyd both have the same birthday. Charlie Kirk Day is October 14th, but a lot of people are celebrating George Floyd Day. To me, though, the 33 stitches by the shooter, that's all I need to know. And you might think that's an oversimplification, but if you've seen how many hundreds of psyops have that same indicator, I'm like, well, this Charlie Kirk thing looks real, but it could be squibbed. We'll just keep looking. And then the governor of Utah comes out and he says, and then Kash Patel too, after a 33-hour manhunt, we caught the shooter. To me, that's hoax code. And it likely references the 33rd degree and order out of chaos, because that's what we're looking at here. The creation of chaos, problem, get the reaction, provide a solution. So this is simple, formulaic problem, reaction, solution, order out of chaos type stuff. And they throw the 33 on it so insiders know what it is. Well, the insiders now include us because we've been paying attention so much that we're reading some of their symbolic language. And lately I've been talking about the need to break down the symbols as well, like the bees, the beehive, the fire, how that was used, the ice, for example. So you find these themes, symbols, metaphors, allegories that I think also need to be unpacked here because we're being hit with propaganda on multiple levels, and they're also aiming at our subconscious. All right, moving on. Then the Plague One says, they say the dog is with family, but also say they don't know if Goods had a dog or if it was the neighbor's dog. However, the neighbor's dog was an Australian Shepherd. And the dog in the car does not look like one. That was not an Australian Shepherd. Here's from the New York Times today. Russia says it used a nuclear-capable missile to strike Western Ukraine. That's certainly an escalation. And I assume they would do the nuke card when we're already in a state of chaos. But I think now would be a good time. And I don't have any hard predictions necessarily, but you can look at the programming as a predictor of what's to come. That's one of the things that we've often looked at here is we have a predictive model. And whatever they're saturating the masses with is likely what the next agenda is. And I think the Erica Kirk blackout stuff is actually significant here as well. And there was some propaganda bit about Venezuela, how the Americans went in there and they kidnapped the president there, but they used some kind of local EMP. Now, something else too. That event was foreshadowed or represented in a Jack Ryan show. Jack Ryan is a Tom Clancy. Tom Clancy, as far as novelists go, is a metascriptor on par with Stanley Kubrick. And he's widely credited with having predicted 9/11. And then he's also got Hunt for Red October, which has to do with the nuclear submarine. So there is that. CNN's broadcasting from downtown Minneapolis. A roaming mob is going from hotel to hotel, trying to locate where ICE agents are, blowing whistles and beating drums. How annoying is that? Okay, continuing. Going through my Twitter feed, there's so many darn videos here. Austin police shut down ICE protesters. Okay, that's... And one thing I've noticed too, and you might want to look out for this. I've noticed a lot of footage from 2020 is being recontextualized as, oh, this just happened. This protester got ran over. And I recognize a lot of these videos from 2020. The quality is pretty much the giveaway. So you can't assume anything's real. And you certainly can't trust truthers. Like the truthers are less trustworthy than the mainstream media because they're slightly less accountable. And a lot of them are after clicks. Is this for real? I thought it was a joke. So the wife of the victim is in front of the SUV, putting up for sale, price to move. It's got to be AI. I'll have to fact check this. Selling my 2007 Honda, one owner, most title, 2 bullet holes in the windshield. I know the AI is so damn good. That's why I wouldn't be shocked if that crash wasn't augmented. Again, there's no reason to assume that these are not closed movie sets. So here's the thing that I brought up with Venezuela. The United States supposedly used a mysterious weapon during the raid to capture Nicolas Maduro, leaving Venezuelan soldiers bleeding and vomiting. New York Post reports, quote, "We all started bleeding from the nose. Some were vomiting blood. We fell to the ground, unable to move. We couldn't even stand up after that sonic weapon or whatever it was." So power going off, sonic weapons. New York Post, U.S. used powerful sonic weapon that brought Venezuelan soldiers to their knees. Witness accounts. Now, we don't have any video to corroborate that. Another Nicolas Maduro, Nick Reiner, Renee, Nicole. Good. We've also noticed these patterns with names that would, again, we're recognizing patterns. Do they all mean anything? I don't know. But we have to take note. Like we have picked up on very specific patterns that have consistent meaning. Like again, the code, the green hair, class warfare, green skin, wicked, Antifa code, very much consistent. All right, moving on. I don't know about that one. Okay, here we go. Rust of October says, I think the goal of this is to get Trump to use the Insurrection Act so civil war can begin. Well, civil war would be appropriate, I think, right now. As far as that movie and the present, it makes sense. There's no reason why a movie like that by that director would come out that would be hitting all these key points if it didn't have some relevant foreshadowing. And then Trump was also talking about the quote nuclear option, having to do with in some way interfering with the midterms. What's up, Pippi Langstroth? Thank you for joining. We have about 70 in here tonight. Our numbers will go up as we get more consistent. I'm going to be on a more steady schedule once school begins, which is this week. And what I'm going to be doing is likely an afternoon live stream at the same time between classes each day. And then we're going to get back into open phones once I pick up a new computer and get settled into an office space. And that's all going to be this month. And if everything goes according to my plan, we're also going to resume the PSYOP trading cards. And I have a list of new cards to make. For example, I wanted some Hoax Anniversary cards. All right, continuing here. Kind of glad that this is happening, though. It's getting rid of a lot of these tiresome, regurgitated conspiracies. You know, Erica Kirk, Candace Owens have both given me fatigue. I'm glad these aren't the top stories anymore. Rust of October says truthers are goofballs. Oh, they are. And I've been making the point lately that they falsely position themselves as the anti-establishment so they can call the mainstream the establishment. Well, that is a deflection and misdirection because the mainstream and the alternative are both part of the establishment. They're just two sides that have been triangulated against one another. The only platform or perspective that doesn't represent the establishment would be the off-world stage. Breaking, Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara got chased down and attacked by rioters. Right. And that they can't all be paid. You know, we have to also look at the fact that these psychological operations do, in fact, evolve regular people. And we've seen this before. You know, can't all be fake, but a lot of people do get engaged. The fact that everybody that I knew was just a buzz about Erica Kirk shows me how these psyops proliferate and people latch on to these emotionally driven narratives and they take sides. So this is revealing because it shows you how powerful the programming is. And the programming in my view, the term programming, the way I use it, it refers to the content that gets you to respond to the fake events on the program as though they were real. This is a collective delusions. These are hyperstitions. And hyperstitions are like superstitions, the difference being hyperstitions are reinforced by the system in which they are presented. We do live in a hyper reality, and it's only getting increasingly more difficult to see through it. Like, if you haven't figured out media fakery by now, and your sole method of determining real or fake is by them making a mistake on TV in the news, you're going to be lost moving forward. Thank you, Big Hair Tsunami, again. Brought out a whole box of wrenches. Pal 5029, Michael Zabrak, Nicholas Pitts, Truth Hurts, D. Brooks, Lowry Video Music, Frank Zen, Glenn Bush, Dipper Doodle, G33, Penguinati Raft, Harry Growler, Kelly, Geo Ptolemy, Jungle Jim, Shad McDaniel, Lore Master, DJ Black have all received memberships. And you're going to be getting links, notifications when I upload my whiteboards. So I have a list here actually of whiteboards I'm doing. And these are infographics and breakdowns of specific facets of the world stage model as we present it. And what I've done is let's see if I have it here with me. I have a list of the different aspects that I think necessitate some kind of a visual to break it down. Because, what's important here is labels, calling things by their right names. And there's only a few perspectives, despite the appearance of internal diversity of thought. There's only a couple of menus, and they're written by the same programmers. And the perspective that you have is given away by your opinions about these events. Your perspective is either mainstream or it's a subset of mainstream. If you have any opinion about any event, it's going to be reflected in that perspective, that point of view. If your opinion, your point of view on any event leads you to conclude something that agrees with Wikipedia or ChatGPT, then you're going along with the program. You have the same built-in presuppositions. And that's what we're talking about, presuppositions. Our perspective, the off-world stage perspective represented here at the iPS think tank, takes into account systemic fakery and its long-term effects, because this is a long-term process. It didn't just start in the last 20 years. It didn't start with Sandy Hook, didn't start with 9/11. No, this is not a new thing. So the concept of news bending is something that we've talked about quite a bit in the last few years, but it actually goes much deeper, history bending. And if your perspective on world events today does not include news bending, history bending, simulated events, then your perspective is contained within the mainstream parameters. Our perspective is different. Doesn't matter if you're a truther, conspiracy theorist, or you don't pay attention to the news, your perspective is going to align with the default. You cannot claim to be deprogrammed if you cannot identify the program. If you cannot delineate between the two timelines, you're programmed. It's just the default. And when I say two timelines, and this is why I have these whiteboards to break these things apart, is we have the real world that we live in, and you can reality test it, the world as represented by media. But then you have a separate timeline consisting of the sequence of fake events. And I said this about a week and a half ago. Everything that we're going to experience in 2026 that's going to involve the masses and their overreactions. Every one of these simulated staged events is already written. Like the actors are in place, they're rehearsing their lines. We shouldn't be reacting to anything as though it's a surprise or a shock, because we know, just because of the formula and past precedent, we know, systemic fakery exists, but that these things aren't spontaneous. They all require planning, coordination. Oftentimes, the major events have decades of planning going into them. So there's no reason to react emotionally. There's no reason to get involved unless you suddenly step back on the world stage and you forget that media not only has the propensity and capability to lie and manufacture, but that it's the standard operating procedure of media is the simulating of major historic events. Psyops are not mere hoaxes. These aren't PR stunts. These aren't anomalous. No, these are historic events that are manufactured, that are persistent, and that remain as fixtures in the consensus world view. I used to see a lot of truther types say, hey, it's fake. It's fake. Don't be distracted. What are they distracting us from? Don't pay attention to it. It's fake. I'm like, okay, well, calling things fake is not particularly insightful anymore. If you're calling things fake, it means that you're up to speed a little bit. Like you're just barely up to speed. But calling things fake is stating the obvious today. You're not doing anybody any favors by saying, oh, that's fake. That's fake. Don't pay attention. Oh, thank you. Like, we need you as a tour guide to make sure we're not paying attention to the wrong things. No, quite the opposite. I think that when we determine something to be fake or likely fake, we need to give it our full undivided attention and learn everything we can about it, because the fake things matter. They don't just distract us in that moment. These things do become permanent fixtures in the consensus worldview. Again, past, present, future correlates to history, news, and the forthcoming fake events that are already scheduled. There's a process here. So as the event is incoming, you're getting predictive programming. When the event is occurring, you're being inundated with concurrent programming. And then after the fake event is executed, is performed, then you're subjected to endless reinforcement programming, where every conversation, every article, every debate reinforces the essential reality of the thing that didn't actually happen. It's a formula. And what we're seeing here are the two timelines merge through the lens of mass media and then are internalized by the news consumers. The merging of the two timelines, the merging of real and fake, is what puts us into a subjective hyper reality that represents a worldview monopoly, puts us into a singular worldview where everybody reacts in sync like a bunch of bots. We're seeing an example of it right now. We're seeing an example of the entire world responding in lockstep to something that, in all likelihood, didn't even happen. And that's because the fake has been superimposed over the real, and the fake stuff, which isn't all the news, nobody here says everything's fake. That's a lazy straw man people use. No, the small percentage of things that are fake, that are simulated, take up all the air, hog the spotlight, dominate the conversation, and everything else in the news cycle bounces off of it. Although you could say that everything reported from mainstream sources rests upon an edifice of fakery, because all the reportage presumes that what came before was actually real. But that doesn't mean everything is fake. But the fake dominates real. The fake stuff is what ends up being the dominant stories that become our history. So every fake event that we deconstruct gets carved into stone as though it really happened. The state manufactures these contemporary myths all the time. Myths, miracles, martyrs, villains. Dr. Bass Ackworth says, whenever you see an event that's perfectly driving a wedge between the blue and the red teams, it's clearly scripted. Yeah, exactly. The perfect bifurcation, because reality isn't split in two like that. You would have some diversity of opinion, but it's so lockstep, it's so perfectly split down the middle. And the reason for the wedge is to maintain this constant dialectic. There's never going to be a point where they both agree on one thing and unite, because the left and the right, the red and the blue, the two sides of the political horseshoe are being actively triangulated all the time. And that's why you can't say that the alt media is somehow truthier and more valid than the mainstream. No, they're the same thing, the pro and the anti. So you have pro and anti, where the anti pretends to be against the establishment. Well, no, pro and anti are the two sides of the establishment. They're both establishment media. They're both representing the monolithic worldview that's being presented to the masses. And the truthers are just as fooled and foolish as the mainstreamers. And at this point, I don't even debate truthers, because if they're still stuck in these controlled opposition narrative rabbit trails, they're never getting out. They're not even thinking. And that's because they're consuming the news passively, which isn't really thinking. It's actually just pure credulity. They're not skeptical. And I don't debate people with settled opinions and belief systems. I mean, you're not talking about the same quality of thinking that would get you to completely break out of their controlled paradigm of pro anti pro anti. Our position here is non. Like, if you don't smoke cigarettes, are you anti cigarette? If you don't drink alcohol, are you anti alcohol? Or are you a non smoker, non drinker? With any one of these anti positions that you take, you're aligning yourself with that whole side of the controlled system, where now you're aligned with all these other issues and you join the army of the brainwashed. It's like, well, I'm against this particular issue, so I'm going to join them. Well, these anti positions are all part of a cluster of beliefs, and you're joining the asylum inmates. It's like, it's not a wise move. You can be a non, you don't have to be the anti. The anti position is a controlled position, and you're going to be following behind a bunch of provocateurs, shills, agents, etc. You can have some independence of thought by going into the non position and recognizing the pro and anti as equally wrong. Dr. Bass Ackworth says if they report truth, it's manipulated in a way to get a certain reaction. Yeah, this thing is incredibly well done in terms of getting the polarized responses. I mean, look at the George Floyd thing. This is such a hypocritical thing where a lot of the anti-cop people, the sovereign citizens on the right, the guys who are all about, you can't pull me over, I'm not going to give you my license, it's my rights. But then they take sides with Derek Chauvin. Huge contradiction. And then even now, the right will say, well, George Floyd overdosed. Derek Chauvin did nothing wrong. There's efforts now to get Chauvin free, to get him out. Free Derek Chauvin is a thing. And they say, no, Biden killed him. Biden killed George Floyd because he opened the borders and let fentanyl in. It's like two different universes. Well, it's the same thing with this one, where the people on the right are going to say it was self-defense. that she was trying to run him over and he was justified in doing so. But you look at the footage and then it's like, well, she was turning the wheel to the right. So now you have all these armchair legal scholars and analysts talking about this thing in nuance, arguing that, well, no, it was self-defense. It was justified. Sprightly Sprite says, I worked in fire mitigation. News did an article on my friend Boss. They changed the details. Did you see that story about the fire in the Alps at that resort? The fire that was started by the person in the Guy Fawkes mask? They said the owner was spotted with the cash register running out like another door that nobody knew about. Dr. Bass Ackworth says bipolar psyops. They get you coming. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Bipolar. But these operations are obviously designed to maintain this perfect split, and we've been looking at this as a hoax indicator. Like when that flight hit the AA flight hit the Black Hawk helicopter. I knew it was going to be the same thing because we'd been watching all year. Everything with Boeing was blamed on DEI. They said, "Oh, this is DEI. Oh, it was a female pilot. That's why it happened." So the right wing's blaming the pilot, DEI, and the left wing saying, no, it's caused by Trump and Musk because they cut the budgets. They fired FAA workers, whatever it is. Each side blames the other side. So that's the other element of it as well. Whenever these things are split in two ways, each side scapegoats the other, but they both believe the thing actually happened. That Black Hawk helicopter was doing a drill, by the way, a continuity of government drill in case America gets nuked. The VIPs are going to be in these Black Hawk helicopters to be evacuated, and that's what they were doing a drill for when that one was hit by that plane. But the narrative about it was the other side caused it with DEI. No, they caused it by cutting funding. So when you have the bifurcated response, both sides agree it happened. They just disagree on the cause and they blame each other. Perfect Hegelian dialectic. Like they both agree. That's the point. And in this case, both sides are operating on the premise that it happened. One side says it was justified. The other side says it wasn't. Rust of October says good was branded as a legal observer, a created term in 1968. Right. Legal observers are agitators and provocateurs. It still looks to me like a closed movie set. It wasn't a lot of people there. And it would be indistinguishable from a movie. You know, if you were just looking at it from the outside, you know, you wouldn't know. You don't know what's really going on. When it comes to these psyops, they're all closed movie sets. And anybody there as a spectator is likely part of it. These are mass casualty simulations, simulated events. You know, there's a movie that came out called A Trophy. I think it's called, let me see if I can find this show. I have to watch it. Atropia. So there's a film that came out in 2025 called Atropia. And it's about an actress who's working on a US military simulation facility. It says here she falls for a soldier, blurring the lines between performance and reality, but the film explores simulated warfare. So Atropia, again, came out in 2025. It's about a US military base that does nothing but simulate Iraqi war zones. So it's a training facility before you go to war. We live in this village where they simulate things all the time. I saw the trailer. It had a donkey, like an exploding donkey. It had people crying, and then they take breaks and they have their. It's just like it's a big movie set. And that whole area, by the way, I think it was near 33rd Street, half a mile from where George Floyd was. With the whole area had the the dinosaurs and the giant shark. To me, that's just likely a movie set. We talked about this before. It's not just the entertainment that relates to the fake events. You have drills that occur concurrent with these things. So people would ask, like, well, how do you explain the 9/11 jumpers? Like, how can you say that nobody died on that date? Well, when you break down the event and you find out there's dozens of mass casualty simulations with the theme of terror attacks. So you have terrorist drills being occurring on 9/11, where I think they said the NRO National Reconnaissance Office had like 88 drills. So if you have these simulations of terror attacks, these drills going on, well, what do you think they're doing at the scene of the drill? They're closing it off like a movie set. Anyone who's not in on the simulation is not going to be on the set. Dinah Southard says, you supply the images, I'll supply the SciWar. Yeah, that's William Randolph Hearst. You supply the photos, I'll supply the war. And in this case, it's just video clips and narratives. And then people are responding to their biases and what they've been conditioned to believe. All right, moving on. Going back to my Discord server. We're just getting started on this, so we're going to be following up on it. Again, we brought up the concurrent programming with the 28 years later, the Bone Temple, as it relates to that, quote, horror movie come to life. And then the Greenland 2 tagline, 5 years ago, the world ended. That was just the beginning. That kind of strikes me as a reference to 2020, a little more than 5 years ago, but it seems like a continuity here. And then there was Spinal Tap 2, which Rob Reiner just died, supposedly, but this connects to it. And its title is The End Continues. And there was some 9/11 symbolism there. Spinal Tap, the cover art has the twin pillars from the Stonehenge. It looks like two towers. And Nick Reiner is at the Twin Towers jail. But the end continues. And I think it was released, I have to double check the date. It might have been released on September 11th. But anyway, the end continues. Seems to be like a repeated notion here. No, it was released on November 11th. But still, 5 years ago, the world ended. That was just the beginning. And that one's about a comet hitting the Earth, Greenland 2 migration. Now, Greenland 2 migration, maybe it's a connection with the whole ice thing, which has to do with immigration. But regardless, that was in theaters on January 9th. So it's noteworthy because the timing of the release. It's certainly not boring. We're not even 2 weeks into the new year, and it's already escalating. And again, it's safe to say that this event was scheduled long before this week. This was already on the books. This was already going to happen. Last time I talked to Fakeologist, he had brought up, do you think that the PSYOP entertainment complex takes off for the holidays? Because we did have a very slow period. There was a lull. And it seemed to be the case that, yeah, there seems to be a lack of activity. Maybe they're getting set up for the next big thing. We talked about the Erica Kirk exposed in a CIA linked documentary about where she's briefing the officials about grid wiping EMP attacks. Okay, moving on. I think I covered most of what I want to get through. Yeah, for the most part, we got through everything here. The next thing to do, and I'm probably going to do this, maybe even I'll record one tonight, is I want to whiteboard the blackout themes. We got Leave the World Behind, White Noise as two examples of movies that have that theme but also contain predictive programming that has been noted by the mainstream. Now we have this thing with Erica Kirk. And again, Erica Kirk was in the movie called Heads of State as the Vice President Elizabeth Kirk. And again, Heads of State, Vice President Kirk. And it's a John Cena movie. Kind of a, I guess it's sort of it's a comedy, but in it, she's behind the plot to take out the president so she can take over. So I'm like, oh, that's very much on brand with Erica Kirk. But the significance of that, again, is the actress who plays the Vice President Kirk is Carla Gugino, who is the same actress who's the blonde femme fatale next to Charlie Kirkland in Snake Eyes. It's an action comedy. But according to Tempest, again, Erica Kirk was called the Storm at the memorial. And now you've got the Tempest. These are themes that you see prevalent throughout all these different representations of her in fiction. But Tempest does point to a nuke. So that's kind of what we're waiting on. And so I was not surprised to see that Putin's already getting ready to do that he launched one, albeit a dummy, but it shows you it's on the table. We can see the pieces, the game board pieces, being put onto the board before they go into play. Thank you, Big Hair Tsunami, Polly, TM Harks, Paradox Moronics, R. Cook, God got bored. Watching Mama Adamski have all received the Blue Wrench. Space Chimps. We also had a T-Rex in space. And Chris Perry have all received the Blue Wrench Lodge membership. I have not seen Eddington, Robo Nation. What is Eddington? We want to map these things out. And the reason why, okay, that's a neo-Western film thriller. Oh, Joaquin Phoenix. Was this one filmed in New Mexico? I saw a trailer for it. Joaquin Phoenix, major Metascript actor. So you've got, yeah, this is filmed in, here we go, New Mexico. Mayor Ted Garcia of Eddington, New Mexico implements a lockdown and enforces mask mandates based on the governor's orders. Joe lives with his emotionally unstable wife, Louise, and her conspiracy theorist mother, Dawn. Oh, this looks good. Oh, it's distributed by A24. Same company that did Civil War. Okay, there's quite a lot there. I'll have to check that one out. I'll put that in my notes. Yeah, Jameer and May, we were talking about that Erica Kirk being part of a CIA-connected documentary about an EMP. It's called Black Start USA. Again, Black Start. And so blackouts, we were mapping this out before. The theme of blackout has been consistently connected with EMPs, but also with riots, even with BLM. There's a consistency here. So Black Start USA 2010. But yeah, I'll check out Eddington. Capital city of Greenland is Nuuk, says Lean Dion. Interesting. Interesting. And again, Trump's talking about taking Greenland so China doesn't get it. Meanwhile, this movie Greenland is, well, the sequel comes out. It's just now coming out. And it's about a comet hitting the Earth, and people who are, I guess, essential go to Greenland. Joe Cross says Ribo Nation, same director as, okay. Yeah, now Joaquin Phoenix is a significant actor in this one because of Joker. And Joker's underlying theme is kill the rich, class warfare, subway symbolism, the green hair. And the way they code these fictional universes and their associated characters is consistent across the board. So Joker and Batman is left and right. You know, Joker, communist, class warfare, underclass rising up. Batman is the privileged, the rich, representing fascists. And if you look at the way these two characters are represented in the movies, it's pretty much consistent. And as it relates to the psyops, like Batman is associated with Daniel Penny, whereas Joker is associated with Luigi Mangione. And if you look at the relationship between those two and their affiliated psyops, you can see them as Joker and Batman coded left and right, opposite sides. So Joker falls for the cracks. He's mentally ill, like Jordan Neely, who was killed by Daniel Penny, whereas Batman is privileged and rich. Jamarin says the plot you described is Greenland 1, not Greenland 2. Yeah, exactly. Well, Greenland 2 is the one that's coming out. I don't know. Oh, Greenland leads to Inner Earth. I've heard something. I just think that we're looking at a build-up towards also the summer. For some reason, this day of disclosure has got a lot of people expecting it to actually happen. But the way aliens have been represented lately, it's almost been synonymous across the board with hive mind, where the aliens don't even have a physical appearance, but are rather represented as some kind of a mind virus or a literal virus, like in Pluribus. And then the collectivism thing. It's like the mayor of New York, who, by the way, this is very significant. He was inaugurated in a subway, but he talked about getting rid of the scourge of rugged individualism and replacing it with collectivism. And Pluribus, which ends with the atom bomb, the theme is simply that the individual is holding up progress. The collective is suffering because the individual is not going to join them. And they're trying to get it's called the joining. And then bees. So in Begonia, which is another movie with aliens, but aliens indistinguishable from humans, the conspiracy theorist protagonist is a beekeeper. So the bee theme has been pretty consistent here. But the beekeeper in a movie with aliens, which has sort of like Pluribus, this plot point of all of humanity being wiped out at once, like mass extinction. And Begonia is also very much like an anti-conspiracy theorist thing. That's why I want to see Eddington, because they've manufactured an enemy out of the conspiracy theorist. I think that's part of what Candace Owens' job was as well. Essentially a hit piece against people who don't trust the news. Not that they're trying to get rid of it, because the anti-position is part of the ecosystem. And so the reason why Candace Owens became the #1 podcaster is because they really needed to, I think, reinforce the structure. Let's make sure you have a bunch of people who don't trust the media so we can triangulate them against those who do. They don't want conspiracy theories to go away. They promote conspiracy theories, but they promote them as the bad people. So you have the structure set up triangulation where one is always good, always correct, can do no wrong, and the other is always wrong. It's the old golden child scapegoat dynamic. Jamarin says, you'll find St. Louis is a key Masonic city with its arch and lots of breweries with bee symbolism. Well, the beehive has a great deal of significance. It's mentioned in the third degree. Again, the beehive, the drones. It's also associated with the Templars, the Mormons. But we've seen this before. The bees in Utah, of course, the whole symbols of the beehive state with the Charlie Kirk thing. And then before that, the subway killing. The stabber had a bee tattoo on his chest, which I think I would suggest is significant there as well. But yeah, this whole country is very much Masonic. Mormonism is Masonic. And we talk about Masonic. We're not saying the Masons do everything, but it's just one of the more overt examples of symbolism that you can attach to a specific group, like the 33s, for example. But the symbolism is not limited only to the Masonic. But, and I was comparing, I've been studying alchemy lately, like the alchemists. And alchemy is similar to Masonry in the sense that they're not talking about really building things out of stone. The Masons aren't going and building structures, but they use stoneworking as allegory for the spiritual progression of the member, the character development, but it's all just allegorical. Alchemy wasn't about doing chemistry, but it was about taking things like salt, sulfur, mercury as allegory for the body, soul, and spirit, and the transformation of consciousness. But it's just allegory. So this idea of symbolism is, it's inherent in the secret societies. It's in the esoteric aspects of mainstream religions even. But there's an esoteric in the movies. There's symbolic and esoteric meaning in the psyops, which we're consistently seeing. And it's not like we're saying this symbol means that because I saw it in this grimoire. No, we're looking at the meaning based upon like context. How was it consistently used? And it's become something of an ongoing joke, a running joke here, that when you see the number 33, you're probably dealing with a hoax. And when has that not been true? It's like every major fake event. In fact, I sent out half a dozen copies of the handbook for the recently deprogrammed, and I put the 33 PSYOP card as a bookmark. So if you're getting the books from me signed, I'm putting PSYOP trading cards as bookmarks. So the last 5 or 6 of you that order the book, you're going to have that card. And it's been this ongoing joke. I'll say, how many shots did Frank James fire into the subway? How old was the QAnon shaman when he ran into the Capitol? And we go down the list. Every time there's some kind of a fake event, there's always a very conspicuous 33. Like, we didn't write this stuff. And the best that I can ascertain is that this is internal code. 42, 33, very consistently used numbers. 42 is generally connected to the themes of blackouts, darkness, the Saturn stuff. Now, we noticed this for some time, but I really kind of honed in on it when in 2019 on 7/13, which was, the future date of Trump's shooting, 7/13/2019, there was a blackout in Manhattan on 42nd Street that put 42,000 people in the dark. And it was exactly 42 years to the day of the 1977 blackouts, during which the son of Sam was active. And I thought, blackouts, 42 years apart. What's with that? And as we map this stuff out, we see, okay, these numbers are consistently associated with the same themes. 42 is consistently associated with civil rights. For example, Mr. 42, Jackie Robinson. Rosa Parks. How old is Rosa Parks? When she famously refused to go to the back of the bus. 42. How old was George Floyd's driver and drug dealer? I think his name is Maurice Hall, the guy in the van. 42. His twin, Stephen Jackson, 42. But it's a repeated theme. So, like, what does this mean? Well, 33 and 42 are associated with opposites. 33 is associated with light, ascension. 42, darkness, descent, Saturn, and sun. And I think this might even relate to the black and white pillars in the Masonic temple. Black and the white, the duality. And this also correlates with Batman and Joker, left and right. This is Batman dressed up in black, Joker with the white face paint. There's this consistent application of this, as we described even in this event, the splitting of the two sides. And these operations that all do the splitting seem to be doing so strategically to create this dialectic where you get order out of chaos. And order out of chaos happens to be the motto of the 33rd degree. Five Star says Mormons were in Jackson County, Missouri for a few years in the 1840s, still today. Tons of important buildings all over. And they say the second coming will be in Missouri. Missouri. Yeah, well, that's the whole thing about Mormonism, isn't it? The Book of Mormon is about Jesus in America. And all these doomsdays, all these various religions have their special version of how it's all going to end. And that's something else too. We talk about control over time as being one of the main themes here. Because if they're writing history in advance and portraying it in front of us, they control time. And one thing about doomsday scenarios, whether it's World War III, Civil War, climate chaos, is it puts you in the end times. Like if you believe the news, you believe the science, you believe in all the weapons of mass destruction, you would be correct in thinking that you're in the end times. And so I often describe the mainstream media as the world state church, and the worldview we get is the religion. Like essentially, mainstream media has supplanted all of the traditional religions. And it's not just an analogy, that I'm just making here. It's actually like functionally serving that purpose. It has the end times, eschatologies. It has the saved and the unsaved. It even recycles a lot of the old myths. Climate change is just another flood myth. And how many of these movies have we talked about where the nuke hits and the elite go into bunkers and everybody dies? And then at some point, people go back to the surface, like in Fallout. Well, that's really no different than Noah's Ark, where the masses get into the ark. The masses get killed by the flood, but the chosen ones, the ones who trust God or government, get saved. Wall-E, if you haven't seen Wall-E, it's a retelling of Noah's Ark through the lens of science fiction. But instead of an ark in the ocean, it's a spaceship. Same exact story. And it's not that they're out of ideas in Hollywood and Pixar, and they're just stealing stories from the Bible and recycling them. No, it's called syncretism. It's systematic. What they're doing is they are replacing all of the old faiths and religions with this new one world view, one world religion, which is disguised as just news and history unfolding, but it's actually a worldview. And the reason why we see so many examples of religious iconography, how many examples do we have of Christ being portrayed in movies? Joaquin Phoenix, actually. If you look into Joaquin Phoenix's work, he's often represented as a Christ figure. I mean, it's in everything from 8 millimeter. He's crucified even and shot in the side, like Christ getting stabbed with the spear. In the Joker movie, he's Christified, if you look at the symbolism. And by the way, the phoenix was a symbol of Christ a long time ago. It's a symbol of death, resurrection, but it's also been synonymous with Christ. But Joaquin Phoenix has constantly been representing himself, or in his movies, he's been represented in the subtext as Christ, as this having the same theme, but it's not unintentional. And it's not that they're trying to convert people or, again, borrow from religions in that sense, but they're actually amalgamating it. Okay, 5 Star says, I wonder what your thoughts are on the moon orbit on 2.6, puts humans farthest out in space ever. Blows my mind. NASA's getting 100 billion for it. Do you remember the Artemis project where they were, I think it was even was it a 42-day mission? They sent something around the moon and back. Now they're planning on doing something with people on it. But when they did that, NASA released a video, an animation of a rocket going around the moon, the capsule. They showed the whole thing, how it would be done, but it was all computer animation. But they had to put a note on there. This is animation. And I'm thinking, why do they have to put a note on there? So we would know it's animation. Shouldn't it be self-evident? Well, no. Because the stuff they show us that's, quote, real looks so much like animation that they have to specify it. Otherwise, people would think they already did the mission. But my point of view on NASA is pretty much that the space program is about programming the space between your ears. That outer space is really just a way for them to contextualize our collective experience, because now we live in one world as they present it. It's a closed system. It's imperiled by human beings because we're a bunch of polluters. And once they've established the game board and its parameters and its closed nature, then they can set up scarcity, and then they can make the case that it's a commons. One person doesn't cover his mouth, everybody gets sick. One person can threaten entire systems. So if you look at the systems, outer space is now a commons, low Earth orbit. And who's messing up low Earth orbit with space junk? Elon Musk. The Chinese space station was hit by I don't know if it was a Starlink, but it's hit by something. Cyberspace is another commons. It's a global commons. And one person, Elon Musk, is single-handedly filling it up with mind junk, making it dangerous for everybody. So one of the lessons that we've been shown over the last few years is that we cannot let individuals have too much power and influence, because one person can destroy an entire system, a commons. And Musk is that designated villain who has made cyberspace and outer space both into areas that are possibly in danger, where, again, these are like lessons we're being taught. Like this is what pluribus is about. And this is what the mayor of New York was discussing when he said we have to get rid of the rugged individualism in favor of collectivism, because now everything's collectivized. Everything's a commons. The individual is the threat to the herd. Thank you for the super chat there, 5-star. Appreciate the support. I just missed your comment though. My laptop died, so I'm looking at my small screen here and I can hardly read these things. Ribo Nation says Musk is fulfilling his grandfather's dreams. Yeah, I've come across that. He comes from this technocrat background. And Elon Musk is another one of these characters that is a Frankenstein's monster amalgamation of a lot of different characters. And one of his personages is actually Werner von Braun. Von Braun, of course, former Nazi, who wrote Mars, a technical tale about the colonizing of Mars by the Elon. But when I look at NASA and the space programs, it's also an indicator here of how monolithic this thing is, this worldview shaping mechanism where all the governments are playing along with it. You know, there's that movie that came out called Fly Me to the Moon with Scarlett Johansson, which we need to break down some of these actors and actresses and their symbolic significance. But in that one, and there's quite a lot to unpack there, but in that one, she's hired to help sell the idea of a moon landing, and they have to fake it. They have to stage it to trick the Russians. But that idea that America faked the moon landings to trick the Russians makes sense to a lot of people, even Joe Rogan. Like they find that acceptable as a premise that, yeah, we had to fake it to trick the Russians, but it doesn't mean that the space program is fake. It just means that they had to win this propaganda victory. So if you can accept that premise, then you can understand that it's partially correct. It was a propaganda event to win the space race against Russia, but it's also it's actually more accurately described as a propaganda event to fool the masses that Russia and America aren't actually in competition to reach space, but space is a it's a global psyop in a sense, but it shows the cooperation. And when you look at the fact that this engineered history, these staged events that become part of our collective history, that these things are not contested, that no one's calling out the fakery. I mean, think about it. If Russia and America were in any way competing in a meaningful way, one could just undermine the other by calling out the fakery, by exposing it. It wouldn't be hard, but they don't. They reinforce the fakery together. It's because they all share the same backstage. Yeah, exactly. Lasers like Antarctica. So they agree above and then below. But my point of this is simply that the fact, and this isn't speculation, this is documentable fact, this is based on empirical research and observation. The fact that our history is being proactively created eliminates the idea that there's a lot of competing governments. There's just a big G and a lot of little G's, but there's only one government. If you want to, talk about in a meaningful sense, we're talking about a monolithic presence that shapes the collective worldview, and all of the different governments agree with it. And moreover, the lack of any kind of resistance by any group anywhere in 2020 shows that no, everyone's in lockstep. So if we're correct about this, and we are, it's not even an if, but if these events are being manufactured and they're being planned in advance, then it really kind of destroys the idea that we have any power in the outcomes. And what does it matter anyway if these major events are staged? In other words, does voting really matter if you're looking at the theater of Psywar? Or is politics in general just a steam valve. Let people blow off steam, let them think they have power. It's all about manufacturing the illusion of control, which helps maintain the status quo. There's kind of this interesting bit of trivia. If you just look at where Lee Harvey Oswald was working when he shot JFK, because he was working at Riley's Coffee. And when reporters went to Riley's Coffee to find out more about Oswald, they found that all those employees went to go work for Boeing and NASA. And then there's some communication between Oswald and his girlfriend at the time where he insinuated that he was going to go work for NASA. So, like, well, how does that make sense? It makes perfect sense if you think about Stanley Kubrick as director of not only Apollo 11, but the JFK assassination. So it kind of reveals here that NASA, I talk about NASA being there for worldview warfare and controlling the space between your minds. I think NASA's big budget isn't for bad science fiction entirely. I think that might be the reality faking department of government. Like if we were to try to figure out where is the PSYOP entertainment complex headquartered, probably NASA. And when Oswald went to go work there, he probably thought he was going to go to the moon and fake it as an astronaut, but he got assigned to a different mission. He got put in the assassination area. Like instead of going to the moon, he went to the grassy knoll. Same director. Stanley Kubrick was a director of the operation where Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin, just as he was the director where Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. It just shows you the versatility of NASA. And we're talking about worldview warfare. And also think of the significance of Elon Musk and SpaceX, and then also owning X. So here he is involved with outer space, but he's also involved in our inner space, in our minds, in the realm of ideas and information warfare. So when I say NASA's primary purpose is control over worldview, that's very consistent with what Musk is doing with SpaceX, and then X being a major part of this worldview formation and maintenance. And then Watching Mama says, one world government explains how they shut down the whole world in 2020. Yeah, that was a big reveal for me. I saw no resistance, no autonomy. There was no principled pushback against it. Everybody went in lockstep. And that's never going to change. It's always been that way. The one world order is already here. The one world religion's already here. It's mass media. And you could look at the big government. Government really means, in some ways, you could break it down as mind control. Governing meant as mind. So the primary purpose of it is control over the collective worldview by controlling our interpretation of everything, our internalized version of the world, and then also controlling time. And time control is a huge theme. I just watched this very good video today on the Truman Show as a Gnostic myth. And I brought this up a couple months ago. I said that Ed Harris, Christoph, is the demiurge. The fake, not the God, but the creator, not the ultimate source of reality, but the creator of this localized world, and a corrupt control freak at that, who keeps his creations in a state of ignorance. But anyway, this video breakdown of the Truman Show described this idea of the demiurge, the control freak, self-appointed God over these local prisoners, which is an old Gnostic myth retold. But I was describing this before, and this video pretty much was in agreement with everything I said. But I was pointing out here how Ed Harris plays that same archetype in multiple movies. And that's where our breakdowns get, these mind maps get to be very revealing, is that you find that we're being told various stories in various contexts, but oftentimes the same actors will reprise the same role, that they embody the same archetype movie after movie. And that particular actor has consistently represented this idea of the controllers over time and space, the controllers over the matrix. Ribo Nation says January 6th feels like a Kubrick psyop, or less like a Kubrick and more like a Michael Bay movie, accidentally wandering into a Paul Greengrass documentary with Adam McKay narrating from the sidelines. Well, there's a lot of these big events have multiple contributors in terms of the psyop reinforcement content, the foreshadowing, the predictive programming. But January 6th, the 1-6 code goes back as far as Waco, where it's 1.6 million rounds that caused the ATF to go in. But there's indications that multiple directors contribute to the big psyops. Kubrick is definitely one of the major meta scripters of 20th century psyops, but his influence and input can be seen in 2020 for sure, foreshadowed as far back as 2001 Space Odyssey. But Tom Clancy, in the realm of novels, is being represented right now with Venezuela. The Nolans, Christopher and Jonathan Nolan, are pretty big with the nuke thing. James Cameron, major meta scripter. And I need to watch Avatar 3 because Avatar 2 had a lot of concurrent events with the movie that it related to. And James Cameron, contributor to 9/11 predictive programming. And the last one he came out with, the one that's out right now, is called Fire and Ash. And then we had the spate of fire-related psyops around New Year's. Laser say, I'm just wondering what NASA is doing to require 67 million per day. I think it's just a slush fund for psyops in general, or, and I've considered before, that maybe deep space is just a euphemism for deep underground military bases, DUMBs, and that they're actually building underground infrastructure. Like Mars is probably, I think it's already there. It's already been built. It's probably beneath Denver. Maybe it's in Nevada. Could even be China. It could be in multiple places. But Mars is most likely underground. And when you go to Mars, it's not terraformed. You're going to be underground anyway. So the fake Mars bases have, I think, already been built. And that's where all the money's probably going. Copacetic says crisis actor payroll. Yeah, no kidding. There's been some big winners. Like the guy that stopped the Bondi shooting made 2.5 million on GoFundMe. And I think the wife of Renee Good might have made out pretty much with a pretty solid GoFundMe. Somebody should set up a GoFundMe for that dog, for Hazelnut. You could probably set up a GoFundMe account for the ICE agent that shot her, and it would probably get just as much money. Like we saw so GoFundMe seems to fund a lot of these events. You had the GoFundMe competition between that racist on the playground, Shiloh Hendricks, and Carmelo Anthony, who stabbed one of the twin brothers, where they're each getting funding, and GoFundMe let it go. And the rhetoric in the comments was pretty bad. And once they each made it up to $1 million or whatever, GoFundMe blocked the comments. But generally, you'll find that GoFundMe will pay for the leftists in their left-wing leaning psyops, and give, send, go will fund the right wingers. Like, for example, Daniel Penny is one of the top earning give, send, go crowdfund recipients. The difference is give, send, go also adds prayers. Lean Dion says the Bondi hero was just in New York praising Trump. Interesting. Yeah, Bondi was a fascinating one because you had the cheesecloth guy. You had an actor shot in the head doing selfies and then talking about how he got shot in the head, who was at the 10-7. So the 10-7 event, now he goes to a Hanukkah event, same thing happens to him. Meanwhile, Brown University had two different students who had both survived different school shooting events previously. So recycled crisis actors are hoax indicators. The odds of being at multiple school shootings, somewhat astronomical, implausible. And we've seen this many times. I mean, it's quite unbelievable. But after the Las Vegas Harvest Festival shooting, 50 of the victims went to a different country music concert in California, and they got shot at again. The Thousand Oaks Borderline Bar and Grill. Anonymous says, woke up on time to catch this live. Yeah, we'll be on a more regular schedule soon, and our numbers will go back up. If you're new here, you may not know. When the channel started, our numbers were usually 300 or 400 live. But we've had to confront a lot of distractions. And, I don't usually use the word censorship because we're not really censored. The media does not even acknowledge this viewpoint. But we have had our opposition. But once we're on solid ground again and we open up phones, our numbers will shoot right back up. But for the last year, we've been focusing on quality over quantity with great results. And I think it was the right thing to do as we were steadily consolidating our ideas, codifying auto hoaxing as a philosophical stance and a methodology, which is why I released the book, Handbook for the Recently Deprogrammed, The Skeptic's Guide to the Theater of Psywar. That book encompasses all of the best ideas that we've generated since this think tank started. And it's really the basis, the foundation for our position on everything moving forward. So now that we have that, now that we're very clear on what we are and what we aren't saying, we got rid of all the straw man arguments. We're pretty much established as a skeptical and separate body of media analysts. Now we can go ahead and consolidate our forces and work on numbers. But anyway, we'll continue this conversation tomorrow. I'm going to have to upload some archives. I've been falling behind a little bit, but if you check them out, first of all, go to ips.monster, and I'm replaying recent live streams on a loop. But I'm also uploading to the archives the videos and a synopsis of the transcripts that I generate with AI, and it delivers bullet points with all the major topics and direct quotes and clickable links. I think you'll find it useful. But I'm going to probably check out Eddington. Part of my research is actually watching a lot of this content, watching the programming. And I like movies. I'm not averse to watching movies or films. I was always into movies, films. I was a film studies major for a little while. That's how I got into Kubrick, actually. And that's when I started watching movies with a fine-tooth comb. But when I watch these movies, I do so because I like to know what is being projected onto the zeitgeist. What are the masses being prepared to accept as inevitable? And based on our understanding of the world stage and what it's built upon, systemic fakery, we're able to, as you can with any model, extrapolate outcomes, make predictions. And we have been consistently doing so for some time. And one of our best examples of this was we were waiting for the Trump head wound that we knew he would survive based upon the media ecosystem at that time. So we've been vindicated enough times to where what we're looking at is pretty clear. When I say systemic fakery, I'm talking about that these events are all part of a program of future scheduled fake events that will be inserted into our consensus worldview through the medium of psychological operations portrayed in the news. So, it's like reality TV in many ways. Like we are being governed by, government by theater. These are influence operations, but they're far more persistent. They're not mere PR stunts, but we're watching the making of history right in front of our eyes. And it doesn't matter what we see, what we know, it matters what the consensus will believe. We're in a world of believers, and as knowers who insist on knowing rather than just passively believing things, we're outliers. And our perspective is not acknowledged, has no representation. And anybody who noticed the fakery of 910 with Charlie Kirk had to come to the realization that their perspective will never be echoed or mirrored or acknowledged by anybody in alt media or mainstream. Candace Owens is the biggest voice in the Charlie Kirk conspiracy theorizing, and she will not talk about squibs. And that's because this is a controlled system. So we've had to establish our own separate platform for media skeptics who have a deeper, I'll just say, a wider field of information, a wider situational awareness. We're not limited to main and alt, but rather our perspective encompasses a wider array of information and viewpoints and understandings. And the truther side of things has been consistently getting the wrong information. They've been trusting the wrong sources, and they've been misled. Mainstream truthers never figured out what predictive programming is or what causes it or what its purpose is. We figured that out. So on that basis alone, we've split off because they're never going to be correct. They're not oriented towards truth. They're part of this triangulation system where they're just going with the program. But this is the year, I think, that we're going to do our best to consolidate anybody who's self-deprogrammed enough to see through these events, who are then also able to recognize that their point of view will not be acknowledged. You will be gaslit. It's Kafka-esque. Here you are, perceptive, noticing patterns, documenting things, making predictions, and accurately ascertaining what is real, what is fake, delineating between the two timelines. And that point of view is not reflected anywhere. None of the influencers, none of the popular channels were equal. They won't even touch it. So we've had to create our own category, our own branch of media analysis. So you've got mainstream and alt, which is world stage centric, and then you have us, which is off world stage. The off world stage perspective is the novel approach that we bring into this. And this is only going to get bigger and more effective. As it is right now, our Discord server is an effective fake news wood chipper. I took 10 days off and I came back and it took me less than 24 hours to catch up on everything that I missed. Because for every day I was gone, there was a huge body of content that was uploaded, posted, and linked all over the Discord server, because that's what we have been doing for so long. We're rather effective at this. Anonymous Mouse says, that's me. I self-deprogrammed and left Trutherville and Alex Jonestown. Yep, you put down the Kool-Aid at Alex Jonestown. And if you can avoid the red pill distribution, the red pill addicts, the red pill distributors, they're all basically just selling you another version of the mainstream. Like, the way I would describe it is this: mainstreamers are dreaming. Like, the blue pill's the dream pill. The red pill is not awakening. It's not an awakening. It's not like an antidote to the spell. It's actually taking you from a dream into a nightmare. So whether you're having a blissful dream or a nightmare, you're still asleep. The only ones who can actually claim to be awake are those who are aware of the program. And the only ones who have that level of situational awareness are the auto hoaxers. All right, thanks for your comments and participation in the IPS think tank. This has been the Infinite Plane Saturn Day Night Live for January 10th, 2026. We'll continue this analysis tomorrow. I'll catch up on archives and we'll see where things have progressed. But I want to say thanks to everyone for the research. The great findings that I noted today, of course, were the Greenland 2 and 28 days later with the Bone Temple. Like, this is what we're looking for. Concurrent programming is cutting edge. Predictive programming has been noted for some time, but that doesn't tell the whole story. The concurrent programming reveals the coordination between mainstream entertainment and fake events. That is damning. It's consistent, it's predictable, and it's very revealing. And one of the reasons why I think it's been buried so much is that when you're dealing with psyops, you don't know who's behind it. Various organizations, government entities. But when it comes to predictive programming, you can start naming collaborators. You can name directors who are sellouts to government, who are creating psyop reinforcement content, who are helping to manufacture history, who are part of the mass brainwashing operations. It's like, oh yeah, we can name names: authors, directors, musicians, podcasters. It doesn't mean they know the entirety of what they're a part of, but it shows they are indeed a part of it. So our next phase here is the great deconstruction. The great deconstruction, which we're kicking off here now, is going to be the systematic breakdown of every fake event going back for the last 100 years on a timeline. We're going to reconstruct the fake timeline that they superimposed over the real one. And as we reconstruct it, we're going to have it juxtaposed in 3 columns with these 2 other columns. So you're going to have the mainstream view of what happened, the alternative view, and then the off-world stage perspective, which is inclusive of all of the predictive and concurrent programming. And what we're going to reveal with this is the timelines involved, like the time frames. How far in advance are these various events planned? Because the further in advance they're planned, the less you can claim that we have any control over what's happening, the more it reveals that there's total monopolies going on here with regard to our manufactured reality. That we have fictional universes superimposed over the real thing, and the masses who are passively consuming media live in this fusion between real and fake. This is hyper reality, as Baudrillard would describe it. And I think it's worse than he even thought. You could find these thinkers, these philosophers like Marshall McLuhan and Baudrillard and many others who notice that we're essentially living in a simulation enhanced reality, but I don't think any of them got the full extent of it. They wouldn't have been able to. When you're in the closed system, your options are very limited. The reality itself is guardrailed. Our perspective is from outside the Truman Show. And you can't claim to be outside the Truman Show if you're not fully apprised of media, fakery, and manipulation and the full extent of it. All right, we'll catch up tomorrow. Thanks again for the comments and continued participation in the IPS think tank. And thanks, Big Hair Tsunami, for all the blue wrenches. I'll be uploading members only content. So if you're a member, check your notifications. And the relevant links are all at ips.monster.